Hello everyone and welcome to the Angular for Beginners course. I'm Vasco from the Angular University and I will be your instructor for this course. The goal of this course is to get you quickly up to speed with the Angular framework. And we're going to do that by learning first the most commonly used features of the framework. These are the features that you are going to be using nearly every day, so why not learn them first and clearly separate them from the most advanced features that are used only sparingly. This is the best way to quickly get comfortable with the framework. So here is what we're going to do. In the next 2.5 hours, we are going to quickly scaffold an Angular application. We're going to get this initial playground up and running using the Angular CLI. Then we're going to answer some very common questions regarding Angular. What is Angular? Why Angular? What are the key benefits of the framework? We are going to answer all these questions in this initial section, and then we're going to start learning Angular components. We're going to dedicate a full section to Angular components. We are going to learn how to build our own custom components. We're going to learn how to build our own tree of components. We're going to cover component inputs, outputs, event emitters, and more. We are also going to cover the Angular core directives, things like ngIf, ngFor, ngSwitch, etc. that we're going to be using all the time. We're going to learn how to style Angular components using ngStyle and ngClass. We are also going to cover the Angular service layer. We're going to learn how to build our own custom injectable services, and we're going to learn how to fetch data from a backend using the Angular built-in HTTP client. We're going to learn how to handle observable data streams and how to pass data to an Angular template using the async pipe. We are also going to present a complete catalog of all the built-in Angular pipes that you have available for formatting application data. Also included in this course is the TypeScript Jumpstart ebook, so this will answer some of your most common questions about the TypeScript language. This Angular for Beginners course is a subset of the Angular Core Deep Dive course, which is a much more detailed walkthrough into all the features available in the Angular Common and Core modules. Let's have a look at what other courses we have available in the Angular University, and after that, jump straight into our Angular for Beginners course. If you would like to learn the Angular framework, we have a complete set of video courses available for you at the Angular University. So our courses are always updated to the latest Angular, and if with time they get deprecated, we refilm new versions. We have courses for all levels, from beginner to intermediate to advanced. These are the latest lessons, and many of them are completely free, so you can watch them even if you are not logged in to the website. If you scroll down, you're going to find here the recommended learning path for our video courses. To start, we have here the Angular for Beginners course, which corresponds to this course that you are already watching. We also have the Angular Core Deep Dive course, which provides an extended guided tour to the Angular Core and Common modules. We also have a complete course on TypeScript, where we will be learning the language features and applying them to a concrete use case. We are going to be building a Node REST API. We have also a practical introduction to the RxJS library, and we have here a couple of courses on Angular Forms and the Angular Router. On the application design side of things, we also have available a NGRX course, which is a complete guide to the NGRX ecosystem. And we have also here the RxJS and Reactive Patterns Angular Architecture course, which covers application design using plain RxJS. We have here the Angular Advanced Library Laboratory, which is a course where we will build about 4 small Angular libraries and deploy them to NPM. If you are looking to learn how to understand web security in general and apply those concepts in the specific case of an Angular application, then the Angular Security course is the right course for you. If you are looking to turn your existing Angular application into a progressive web application, then we have here a complete course on that. If you want to get a head start on the Angular material library, we have available the Angular Material course. And if your application is currently not using server-side rendering and you would like to add that feature, then we also have you covered with the Angular Universal course. We are constantly releasing new courses and free lessons, so make sure to subscribe here to our newsletter so that you get notified whenever new content is available. And without further ado, let's get started with the Angular for Beginners course. Notice that the code repository of this course is the same as the Angular Core Deep Dive course, as you will see in the next lesson. Thank you for watching and please enjoy the course. Hello everyone and welcome to the Angular for Beginners course. Let's get started learning Angular by focusing on its most commonly used features. In this lesson we are going to quickly set up our development environment and we are going to scaffold a small Angular application. Let's start by answering the question, what is Angular, and see it in action immediately. So in order to have your development environment up and running, you're going to be needing the Node.js runtime. Let's head over to nodejs.org and download here the latest Node version that you have available, and notice that the version number is going to probably be different from the one that we see here. Please use the latest version and not the long-term support version, as the latest version tends to work better with front-end development tools such as the Angular CLI that we will be using in this course. Once you have Node installed on your machine, you are also going to be needing an IDE, or an integrated development environment. In this course, we're going to be using the WebStorm IDE. So if you want to use the same IDE that we will be using in the course, please head over to jetbrains.com/webstorm and download here WebStorm. If you prefer instead a free IDE, you can also use Visual Studio Code from Microsoft. This is also an excellent IDE. Once you have both Node and an IDE installed in your machine, we are now ready to start exploring Angular. The best way to understand what exactly Angular is and how it works is to see it in action, so that's what we're going to do straight away. We are going to switch here to the command line and we are going to quickly scaffold a small Angular application. So in order to do that, we are going to be using the Angular command line interface, also known as the Angular CLI. The first thing that we need to do is to install it globally, because we will be running several commands here from the command line. So in order to do that, we are going to do npm install -g at angular/CLI. This is going to take a moment, but in the end we will have here the latest version of the Angular CLI in place in our machine. Once the installation completes, you're going to have available in your machine a global command line tool called ng, which is the Angular CLI itself. If you type ng and you hit enter, you're going to see here the multiple commands that we have available using the Angular CLI. Now that we have the Angular CLI in place, here is what we're about to do. We are going to use the CLI to generate here a new Angular application using the ng-new command. We are then going to run the Angular application itself using the ng-serve command. So we will have here a small hello world Angular application that we are going to explore. As you can see at this point, Angular is not only a web framework. There is also the CLI, and there is a whole ecosystem of tools that helps us to build web applications. Let's then see this in action. We are going to create here a new application using ng-new, and we need to provide here a name for our application. Let's simply call it Angular-course. Let's now hit enter, and we're going to be prompted by the Angular CLI for a series of questions. First, would you like to add Angular routing? Let's choose the option no at this stage, and let's choose here on the second question plain CSS for our styling. And with this in place, our application is going to be scaffolded and our dependencies are now being installed. The CLI is creating here a series of files in our local file system, and it's also installing here a series of npm dependencies. After a while, our installation is completed, so if we now list here the contents of our directory, we are going to find here a new folder called Angular-course. This will contain our new Angular application. If we cd into it, we are going to see that we have here a series of files that we're going to cover later in this course. Right now, what we want to do is we want to see Angular in action as soon as possible. So what we're going to do is we are going to open this folder in our IDE. Switching here to the WebStorm IDE, we are going to see that we have here the same files that we saw on the command line. So we have here a small node module that contains a series of tasks. One of the tasks, npm start, is going to allow us to start this small Angular application. Let's do that by heading over here to the terminal and running the following command, npm start. This is going to spin off here, using the Angular CLI, a small development server. Actually, internally this is using the ngserve command. So here the server will be available on port localhost 4200. Once the server is up and running, we are going to switch here to the browser window and we are going to type the following URL, http localhost:4200, and we don't even need here this slash at the end. If we hit this URL, we are going to get here our very first Angular application. Let's then do a guided tour of the application and see what is Angular and how does it work in practice. Hello everyone and welcome back. In the last lesson we had our first Angular application up and running. Let's take a moment to explore it and discuss what is Angular and what is the key benefit of the Angular core module. Let's have a look here at the HTML of our application. So as you can see, it's a very simple page with an image and some text and a couple of links here in the bottom. This page that we see here on the screen corresponds here to the index.html file that you can find here inside our source directory. Now if we look closely at this file, we are going to notice that here the title of this page indeed corresponds to the title that we have here in the browser. So this is indeed the correct page that is getting served here. But if we look at the body here of the page, we are going to see that there is really nothing here other than this application root custom HTML tag. So all the title, the image and the links that we have here, they are all being created via this tag. Let's switch to a larger window and inspect this application using the Chrome DevTools. If we have a look here, for example, at the title, we are going to see that this is indeed inside the application root tag that we saw in our index.html. And the same goes for the rest of the page, the links that we have here. All of this is contained inside our application root. The question now is, where is all this HTML coming from? Because as we have seen, this is not coming here from the index.html page. Our application root tag does not have anything contained inside it. It's empty. If we have a look here inside the app folder of our application, we are going to see that all this HTML is coming here from this application component.html file. So as you can see, we have here the title, we have the image, and we have here the links in the menu, also in this component HTML file. This component HTML file also has a component TypeScript file that goes along with it. So if we open it, we are going to see that this is a TypeScript class which has a property title which contains the name of the course, and we have here a decorator that identifies this as an Angular component. We can also see that the application component HTML is linked to this component file using the template URL property. And the component also has a style file, which is the application component.css file, which, as the application was just scaffolded, is currently empty. At this point, we can start to see what is going on here. So going back here to our index.html, we can see that Angular, the core module of the framework, gives us the ability of creating our own custom HTML tags. Again, this application root tag is not a standard browser element. We have created it using a construct which is known as a component that we are going to dive into detail in the next few lessons. The component allows us to link a couple of styles and a template with some TypeScript logic. And here in the selector we have the app root tag, so this is the name of the tag that we can use here in our index.html file. Notice also that going here to the template of our component, we have here this strange looking expression. Now the rest of the template is simple plain HTML, but this expression here sort of stands out due to this syntax here. What's going on here is that we are retrieving here the value of title, which is Angular-course, it's the name of our course repository. We are retrieving this not here from the template, but we are having this expression here evaluated at the level of this component. So we can see that the content of this title variable, this member variable of the component class, is available here for this expression here to grab a hold of and display this on the screen. This means that if we go here to our component class and we change this string here to something else, let's say that we change it to Angular Core Deep Dive, which is the name of this course, and we hit Command S or Control S, we're going to see that our application is immediately reloaded by the Angular CLI development server, and that we have now here on the screen the new title that we have just defined. As we can see, another key feature of Angular, besides allowing us to create our own custom elements, is to allow us to write our program in a way where we are clearly separating the data, also known as the model of our application, from the HTML that is being used to display that data on the screen. That HTML is also known as the view. So in the case here of our component, our data is simply here this title string. But this could potentially be any JavaScript object or array. The data is present here at the component. The component is responsible for retrieving the data and making it available here to the view. The view is represented by our template. Here we are defining the markup of our component and we are accessing the data, also known as the model, using this expression syntax here. This double curly brace syntax, which is known as the interpolation syntax, and this special template syntax is what allows us to access the data in our view. So this means that anything that is written here inside this block, delimited by these double curly braces, is going to be considered a JavaScript expression that is going to be evaluated in the context of this component class here. Let's, for example, change here the title of this variable to something like course title and hit save. Now we are going to see that nothing is getting represented here. This is normal because we are using here this interpolation expression to try to bind to a variable called title, and that does not exist anymore here in our application component. Instead, what we have here is a variable called course title. So if we use that instead here in our binding expression and we hit Ctrl S, we're going to see that now we get here the correct title for the course. Notice that via the template binding expression we can access here any JavaScript object. For example, let's say that instead of having here our data in the course title variable, we would define instead a data object that contains several properties. This could be, for example, the multiple fields of a form. If we now add to this data object a title property, we can still display the correct title in the template. If we now hit Command S, we are going to see that nothing is getting displayed. This is normal because this variable here no longer exists. But if we now access the property data.title, just like if we would access any JavaScript object, we can see that now we have again the correct data displayed on the screen. Let's now quickly summarize what we have learned in this initial lesson. We have learned the two key features of Angular Core. The main feature of Angular Core is the ability of defining our own custom HTML elements. This effectively allows us to extend the browser functionality with our own functionality. The second key property of Angular Core is the ability that it gives us to build our program in a way where our data available at the level of the component and our view, which is defined by the HTML templates, are completely separate. These are in separate files, they use different languages, and we can bind the two things together using the double curly brace syntax. In the next lesson, we are going to learn a couple of other key features of Angular. We are going to learn next about the Angular change detection mechanism that allows us to keep our view and our model in sync at all times automatically, and we are going to learn about some of the security features that Angular has built in. Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we are going to continue to explore some of the key features of Angular Core. We are going to talk about input properties, browser events, we are going to talk about automatic synchronization between the data and the view, and we are going to demonstrate some of the Angular Core built-in security features. Let's now have a look at some of the things that we can do with our template. Let's start by adding here an input box that we are going to be using for modifying the data model of our application. Let's add here an input HTML tag and let's add it a CSS class. For the purposes of this demonstration, let's call the CSS class demo, and we are going to start seeing how can we style Angular components. So as we can see here, linked to this application component class, we have here a styles file that was currently empty. We can use it here to define a series of styles that are only going to be visible inside our application component. Let's quickly add here some styles, and we will be covering Angular component styling in detail later in this course. Right now, let's simply add here a simple HTML selector that is going to select us an input field with class demo inside this particular component. And let's add here a couple of very simple styles. So I'm going to paste in here just a couple of styles so that we can see better the input on the screen. Now that the styles are applied, let's go back here to our template and let's link our input data, which is available here under this data object, to this input field. In order to do that, we can, for example, use here the value property. So if we add here a string hard-coded, this is just like a plain input HTML. We can see here that the text that we pass here to the value property gets reflected here on the screen. Now, if we want to pass it here our data title property, we need to use the following special Angular syntax. And the fact that we are surrounding it with brackets is going to tell Angular that the content here of this string is no longer a plain string. This will instead become an expression. So we can paste in here inside this value property the value of the data.title expression. If we hit Ctrl S, we are going to see that we now get here on the screen the title of the course. As we can see, this input property syntax that we have here is how we can pass data to the template. We could also pass here to the value property using this input property syntax a plain string. So in order to do that, we would need to surround here the string in quotes. If we now hit Command S, we are going to see that we get here again this hard-coded string. This is sometimes used, but if we want to pass in a plain hard-coded string, we can simply use plain HTML for that. There is no need to use a special Angular syntax. The Angular input property syntax is useful really in the case where we want to pass in some data that is available at the level of the component class. Let's see what else we can do with the Angular template syntax. Another thing that we can do is handle browser native events. Let's say that, for example, we have here a native click event that we want to detect whenever we click on the Angular shield. And in response to that, we would like to display an alert box to the user. We can do that in the following way. We need to handle here at the level of the image the click event, and for handling events we have the round braces syntax, and we are going to specify here what event exactly we want to handle, in this case the click event, and on response to the event we need to specify here an expression that is going to tell Angular how to handle the event. So we are going to create here a new function on logo clicked that it does not exist yet in our component, but we are going to add it now ourselves. What is important to keep in mind here is that any function that we call here is going to be resolved using the component. So this function here is going to be called, and here we can add any logic that we need that will respond to the click. So in this case we are going to add here an alert box, hello world. Let's have a look at this in action. If we now click here in our image, we are going to see here an alert box saying hello world as expected. Besides handling input properties and browser native events, another thing that we can do at the level of our template using Angular specific syntax is to give to certain elements of a page a name. For example, using here the hash syntax, we can give a name to this input box. We are going to call it title input. This is called a template reference. We can now use this reference to refer to this input box in other parts of our template. The reference can also be injected here at the level of our component, as we will see later in this course. Right now, let's see how the template reference for the input can be used here directly in our input. We're going to start by detecting here the keyup event at the level of this input, and in response to this keyup event we are going to call here the onKeyUp method. This method is going to be added here to our application component. What we want to do is to pass to this method that we are calling here the current value of the input box. So as the user types here in our input box, we want to be able to pass the new value to the component. The component is going to then take the latest value that we have typed here, and it's going to automatically update the template. In order to implement this logic, we need to somehow get the current value of the input. We can do so using here the template reference. So the template reference is simply pointing to the native DOM element that corresponds here to the input. So if we call here the property value, we are going to be accessing the current value of the input. Now at the level of our component, we have received here the new title that we have just passed into the call to onKeyUp, and we are going to be able to use it to modify the model of our application. So we can do that by accessing via the this keyword here, the data object, and we can assign to this title property the new title value that we have just received. Let's check this in action. We have now refreshed the application, and if we now start erasing here the title of the course, we are going to see that the title is being reflected here automatically in our view. So what you see here is one of the core features of Angular, one of the most important features of the Angular core module. This feature of automatically reflecting in the view any modification that we do to the data. Notice that in our program we did not have to add any specific logic to call Angular to request an update of the view. We did not have to update the view manually ourselves. This is being taken care of by Angular automatically in a transparent way behind the scenes, and it's done in an optimal way. Angular is going to keep track of the changes that we are making to our data, and Angular is going to update the view in an optimal way. Only the parts of the view that need to be changed will be changed. Another very important feature of Angular core is that this synchronization between the model of our application and the view, which is represented by the template, is done in a secure way. So let's say that, for example, here at the level of our title, some attacker was attempting to inject some code in the browser. Instead of a string, if we try to inject here some HTML, what we're going to see is that Angular is going to detect that this string here, data.title, is being used here in a context that expects a plain string, and it's going to apply the appropriate HTML escaping. So as you can see here, this code here was correctly escaped. This was not interpreted as HTML. Instead, the escaping took place. Let's have a look at another example. Let's say that the attacker was trying to inject here a script. So this is a more malicious attack. Instead of simply trying to modify the HTML on the page and change the look and feel of the page, the attacker is actually trying to inject some code into the user's browser. Let's try, for example, to open here an alert box, which is a common way of simulating an attack. If we try to inject this string here in our template, take a look to see what happens. Again, this was not interpreted as JavaScript. We did not see here an alert box. Everything was escaped, and we can see here the script tag on the screen. Notice that we did not have to do anything special to benefit from this security protection. This is all built in by Angular, and it's completely transparent to the application developer. Let's then summarize what are the key features of Angular. We have the ability of defining our own custom HTML tags and extend standard browser functionality. We have also a way of clearly separating in our application the data or the model of our application from the view, which is our template. And we have here a component mechanism that coordinates the interaction between both things. We also have a built-in change detection mechanism, which is completely transparent and that automatically synchronizes the data with the view. We don't ever have to write code again that does this synchronization manually. This is done automatically. And last but not least, the update of our view with new data is done in a secure way, as we have seen. So if we simply fetch data from the backend and provide it here to our component, we are sure that our application will not suffer from many of the common security attacks that typically this type of applications are submitted to. And these, in a nutshell, are the main features of Angular Core. This is what a web framework gives us out of the box. In the remainder of the course, we are going to explore in detail all the options that we have available for building our own custom components. So that's exactly what we're going to do next. We are going to build our own custom Angular component from scratch. Hello everyone, and welcome to this new section of the Angular for Beginners course. So far in this course we have been demonstrating the key features of Angular using a repository scaffolded using ng-new and the Angular CLI. We are now going to quickly switch to a starter repository that is available on GitHub. But please don't worry, because this is not a completely new codebase. This is very similar to the repository that we just scaffolded. All we have extra is a little bit of CSS, some data that we can play around with, and a small HTTP backend server that we will use later in the course to learn the Angular HTTP module. Let's then quickly install this new course playground. In order to grab this code, we need to head over to the github.com Angular University page, available at github.com Angular-University. This course that you are currently watching, the Angular for Beginners course, is a subset of the Angular Core Deep Dive course, so they share the same code repository. To find the code for our lessons, we are going to scroll down, and here in the search repositories box, we are going to search for the Deep Dive course. So as you can see, we have found here the correct repository. It's named Angular-course. If we click into it, we are going to find here our code repository with the correct course logo. Now, in this repository, we are going to find here a series of branches. So here in the branch dropdown, if you click on it, you're going to find a list of branches. Each branch contains one separate section of the course. There are two ways for getting the lessons code. You can either download it as a zip file, or you can clone the repository. Let's say that we want to simply download the code as a zip file. We click into the branch, and here in the GitHub clone or download button, we're going to hit here download zip. This is going to give us a zip file that contains all the code needed for this new section. If you prefer, instead of downloading a zip file, you can also simply clone and switch to this branch. So let's see how to do that. We're going to switch here to an IDE, and let's say that we want to switch to the one-components branch. So if you are using Git in your local machine, you can do that in the following way. You type the following command, git checkout for creating a new branch, -b, the name of the local branch, which is going to be called one-components, because this is the Angular components section. And the second argument is going to be the name of the remote branch that we want to clone, in this case origin/one-components. One way or the other, you're going to get the code and open it in your IDE in your machine. Once you have the code available, you can go ahead and run the npm install command. This is going to install all the node dependencies needed for running our playground. Once the installation is completed, we are going to go ahead and run npm start. After a moment, our development server is going to start up, so if we head over to localhost 4200, we're going to have here the initial starting point of this branch. So as you can see, we have here a very similar playground to what we had before. We just have here a little bit of CSS that will help us to build our components, and we also have here a small server that we're going to be using later in this course. So let's go ahead and start exploring the Angular Component API. Let's see how can we build our own Angular custom component. Hello everyone and welcome back. In the introduction section of this course, we discussed how one of the main features of Angular is that it gives us the ability of creating our own custom elements. So let's do that in this lesson. We are going to be creating our very first Angular custom component. The component is going to be a course card similar to this one. You can see here that the course card is visible, and that's because we have added here some HTML in our application component template. Now imagine that our application has several places where we would like to display course cards. So we don't want to repeat this HTML everywhere on the application. Also, the data that we are displaying here in this course card might be dynamic. We might have multiple cards, such as for example a list of courses displayed, and we want to pass to each card the data that we are retrieving from the backend, instead of hard coding everything on the front end. So let's see how a component is going to help us to implement those use cases. In order to create a new component, let's head over here to the command line, stop our server, and what we are about to do here is we are going to use the Angular CLI to scaffold a new component. For that, we are going to run the following command, ng generate component, and then we need to give here a name for a component. So we are going to call this the course-card component. After running this command, we see here that the Angular CLI has generated here a few different files. We have here a TypeScript file for the component, we have here an HTML template, some CSS, and we also have here a test specification. Let's have a look at these files. They are here inside the source folder, inside the app directory, and we have here the new course card folder containing all these files. Let's now have a look at each of these files separately. Let's start with the course card component. So as you can see, this file contains a TypeScript class called course card component. We can see that this corresponds to an Angular component, which represents a custom element because of the presence of the add component decorator. Inside the decorator configuration, we have here a series of properties. The first is the selector property that defines what is the HTML tag that this component belongs to. Going back here to our application component, the selector means that we are going to replace this course card HTML here by a new custom HTML element called course-card. So the name of this custom HTML tag is the same as the selector string that we have here. The next thing that we have here in our component configuration is the template URL, which points to the location in the file system of a template file. If we open it up, we can see that this is essentially empty at the moment, but the idea is that this file is going to contain the HTML that we are going to see on the screen that corresponds here to a course card. So as you can see, that is going to correspond here to this course card HTML that we have here. So let's go ahead and remove it here from the home page, and let's move it here inside the course card HTML. So now we have copied here this static HTML, and notice that we are applying here some styles. We will see later in the course how to make these styles specific only to this component. Right now, what we're going to do is we are going to run our application using this new Angular component that we have created here, with a set of empty styles for the moment. Let's go to the command line and let's run npm start. After a moment, our server is now up and running, so if we now reload the application, we can see that we get the exact same result that we had before. But now we have extracted the HTML that we had here, and we have moved it inside a custom HTML tag course card that we have created ourselves. This means that if we create here 2 or 3 extra HTML tags in our template and we refresh the application, we're going to see that we have here 3 instances of the course card component, as expected. As we can see, using Angular, we managed to create in only a couple of minutes a new HTML element that we can use to build our application. If this application would have multiple screens where we have to show course cards, such as for example an all courses page or a courses in promotion page, we could use this component instead of copying all this HTML everywhere where we need it. But notice that the strings that we have here with the description and also the image are hard-coded. So we want to avoid that. We want to make this content configurable. We want to receive this content here as an input for the component, the same way that for standard HTML tags we have configuration properties, such as for example here the class property, the source property, etc. Let's then see how can we add configuration properties to our custom HTML element. Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to talk about component inputs. So as we have seen in the last lesson, we now have here 3 instances of the course card component. All this text here is the same, and the image is also the same. We would like to give to each course card a different title and image. And let's see where we could get the data for that. If you open here our Angular course root repository and then open here the source folder, you're going to see that there is a TypeScript file here called dbdata.ts. If we click on it, we're going to see that it contains here a series of courses. So each of these JavaScript objects that we see here corresponds to a given course. Let's see how can we use this to print to the screen one course card for each of the elements that we have here. The first thing that we have to do is to make the data available to the template. The template consumes data that is available here at the level of the component as a member variable. So let's say that we're going to define here a variable called courses that is going to contain a few of the courses here available in this array. Let's say that we want to take here the courses number 1, number 2 and number 3. We can make this data available at the level of the application component so that we can add it to the screen by adding member variables here at the level of this component. Let's say that we want to make available the data for this course, then we define here a variable called core course and we assign it the first element of the courses array. We can do the same for a couple of other courses. Let's define here, for example, one for RxJS and the other for NGRX. So here we have 3 member variables defined. Any of these member variables are available for being used here at the level of the template. Let's try this out. We are going to add here an age1 tag and we're going to use here the Angular template interpolation syntax and we're going to try to access the description of the core course. If we now reload the application, we are going to see that indeed we are using here the title of the first course. If by some reason we would like to print instead the title of the second course, we just have to use the second variable that we have defined here. If we replace core course with RxJS course and reload our application, we are going to see that now we have the title of the second course here in our courses array. So as you can see, in order to be able to use some data in our template, we need to first assign it to a member variable at the level of a component. If we don't do that first, then the data will not be visible here at the level of the template. Now, instead of printing out here the description of the first course, what we would like to do is to pass the description as an input of the course card component. We would like to do something like this. We would like to define here a custom input property called title, and inside it somehow we would like to pass in here the RxJS course description. As we have seen before, the Angular syntax for inputs is the square bracket syntax. So this says to Angular that the content here inside these double quotes is to be interpreted as a JavaScript expression that is going to be evaluated in the context of the application component. Now the question is how to add this input property title to the course card. We can do so by defining here a member variable, which will be a string at the level of the course card component, and we want to annotate it with the Angular core input decorator. This way, Angular will know that this is an input property of the course card element. With this in place, we are now passing in here the description of the course. What we want to do now is to use the title here at the level of the course card component template. In order to do that, we do the same as we were doing here in our application component. We are going to use here the Angular double curly brace syntax for interpolating here an expression, and we are going to access here the title property that is present here in the context of the course card component class. So let's try this out. If we now reload our application, we are going to see that for the first card that we have defined here in our list of cards, we still have here the RxJS in practice course description. Actually, I wanted to pass in here the core course description, so let's quickly fix that. We reload the application and we can see that we have here the correct title. The other two cards, however, are not displaying anything. And this is because the title property for these two other cards has not been defined. So this means that each of the course card components has its own data scope. There is an instance of the course card component for each of the courses. Here we have the title with this value, but here this value is not defined, so we have here an empty string. Let's now change here our template and pass in here the other course descriptions. We're going to add here in the second card the title of the RxJS course, and here we're going to pass in the title of the NGRX course. And now by reloading here our cards, we can see that we have the titles as expected. First the core deep dive, then RxJS, and then NGRX. Now the next thing that we would like to do is to change the course image for each of the cards. So we would like to pass to the component this second property here, the icon URL. We would also like to change here the long description of the course so that it corresponds to the text that we have here. So one way of doing it would be to pass to this course card component two extra properties. We would go here to the course card component and we would add here a couple of new properties. We're going to do this in a different way. We are going to instead pass as an input to the course card component the complete course object in one go with all its properties. For that, we are going to be using here a type definition that we will find here in the model folder. If you open the course.ts file, you're going to see that we have here a very simple interface defined that defines a course type. This is a very practical way of defining custom JavaScript object types in a type-safe way. As we will see, this is going to give us auto-completion at the level of our component classes and even at the level of the template. Right now, we want to refactor our course card component to take as input. Instead of only the course title, we want to take as input a complete course object that we are going to import here from the model folder. Now, moving to the template of our course card component, this variable here is no longer present in the course card component class. Instead, we have available the course object. So we can now access the title of the course by auto-completing here the property that we want. We have here all the properties available at the level of the template, and we can now choose here course.description. The same way that we have printed here the description of the course, we can also access here the course image. So the source of this image is no longer going to be here an hard-coded value. Instead, we are going to pass it the value of the course image. We're going to again access the course object, and we're going to see that in our autocomplete list we have available the icon URL property. In a very similar way, using an interpolation expression, we are going to be able to pass in here the long description of the course. Now, in order to view the free courses on the screen, all we have to do is go back here to our application component template, and instead of filling in the title property, we are going to instead fill in the course property for each of the courses. For the first card, we want to pass in the core course, for the second, the RxJS course, and for the third, the NGRX course. If we now try this out, we are going to see that our data is being correctly displayed as expected. As we can see, the input syntax with square brackets for passing input data to a custom component, it's exactly the same syntax that we use for defining a property of a standard HTML element, such as, for example, an image tag. The syntax is consistent in both cases. Next, what we're going to cover is component outputs. How to generate custom events from our custom components. Hello everyone and welcome back. In the last lesson we learned how to pass input data to a custom component using the square brackets template syntax and the input annotation here at the level of the component class. In this lesson we are going to see how can we make a component such as the course card to emit custom events that can be handled here at the level of the parent component. Let's give an example of a custom event. We would like to go here to our course card component and we would like to add here a button. When this button is pushed, the user is going to view the course, so it's going to be redirected to a new page that is going to display the course that corresponds to the card. So if we hit Command S, we are going to see that now on each course card we have here a new View Course button. As we have seen before, we can add here to this button a click handler using the following syntax. We are going to add here between round braces the browser event that we want to handle, and here on the right hand side we need to provide an expression that is typically a function call. So I'm going to add here a new method on course viewed, and this method needs to be part of the course card component. So we're going to add here a new method that is going to be called in response to this click. In order to confirm that this click handler is working correctly, let's add here some logging and try this out. If we now open here the console in the Chrome DevTools, we are going to see that whenever we click here on the View Course button, we are going to get here the logging statement as expected. So this will happen independently of the card that we click. Notice that the template syntax that we are using here for adding a click event handler, it's just another way of adding a standard browser event listener. This works as a standard browser event, which means that the click event will bubble to outside the component itself, to outside the course card. So this means that if we go here to our application component and we add here a click handler at the level of the course card itself, by using the same syntax, we are going to see that this event handler is going to be triggered as expected. Let's try this out. We are going to add here a click handler called onCardClicked. And this function is going to exist here at the level of the application component. To this event handler function, we're going to be adding here a new logging statement. So what is going to happen here is that when we click here on the View Course button, this event handler here at the level of the course card component is going to get triggered. This logging statement is going to be issued to the console, and then the browser click event is going to bubble up, is going to be caught here at the level of this click handler, and then this function is going to get triggered. Let's try this out. Let's open the console and see what happens whenever we click on View Course. So as you can see, we have here the click handler that was triggered at the level of the card component, followed by the click handler at the level of the application component. Using the same syntax that we have used to handle here a normal browser event, such as a click event, we can also handle custom events. Let's say that instead of responding here to the click event that gets bubbled up from the View Course button, we would like to respond here to a course selected custom event. So this is not a standard browser event. Let's rename here our function in order to reflect the fact that this is a custom browser event. This is going to be called the onCourseSelected method. Let's then go back to our application component and rename the event handling method. At the level of our course card component, what we want to do now is to emit the custom event. In order to do that, we're going to need here a custom event emitter. So let's instantiate it using the event emitter class from Angular core. To our event emitter, we can pass an optional type parameter that is going to define what type of values are getting emitted. In this case, we want to emit an instance of course. So we can use this course selected emitter to emit here a custom value, and here we can pass in the value of the course that got selected. We can access this using this.course. With this new implementation, whenever we click here on the View Course button, we are then going to be emitting here a custom event that is going to pass in the selected course as a payload, and that will be caught here at the level of the parent component using this event handler. We can now retrieve the value that was emitted by the event emitter using the special $event variable. This means that here on the onCourseSelected method, we can now add here a new parameter, which is the value that got emitted by the event emitter, in this case, the course. In order to confirm that we are indeed receiving here the course, let's log it out to the console. Now, if we would try this program as it is, we might be surprised to see that onCourseSelected is not getting triggered. And this is because here in our course card component, we did not mark this event emitter as being an output of the component. So in order for our example to work, we need to add here the output decorator from Angular core in order to mark this event emitter as an output of this component. If we don't add this here, then the example would not work. With this in place, let's now try out our example. As we can see, we have added here our custom event handler only at the first card of our list. Let's have a look at what we have then in the console. If we click here on the first course, we are going to see that we have here indeed the first logging statement done here at the level of the course card component, and we have here a second logging statement that was done at the level of the application component. So our event emitter triggered here a custom event that was caught here, and onCourseSelected was triggered, and the course was indeed printed out to the console as expected. Now if we click here on another course, let's say for example the last in the list, we are going to see that nothing happens other than we can see here the logging at the level of the course card component where the button click handler was triggered, but no custom event was received here at the level of the application component, and this is because we only added here an event handler to the first card of our list. So if we add here similar event handlers to the other cards, we are going to see that any card will be printed out to the console. Let's then try this out. If we try this new version of the program, we see here that the first card was printed out here to the screen, but if we now click here on the second and on the third courses, we are going to see that the correct data is being logged as expected. So as you can see, the template mechanism for handling custom events in Angular looks exactly the same as the one for handling native browser events. So handling here the native click button looks exactly the same as handling here a custom event. There is one important difference though, is that these type of events, they do not bubble up the component hierarchy. So the click event that was emitted here did bubble up from the course card component up until here our application component. This is just the standard browser mechanism. It's not Angular doing the bubbling of the event, but this custom event, unlike the native event, will not bubble up. Also notice that the name of our custom event is exactly the same as the name here of our event emitter. This is because Angular takes the name of the event from the name of the emitter if nothing else gets specified. Let's say that we would now rename this variable to course emitter. So if we would do so, then our example would no longer work, because here in the template we are expecting an output event named course selector, and there isn't here an emitter named like that. So if we want to define here at the level of the output decorator a different name for the custom event other than the name that we have here for the event emitter, we can use here this string parameter. So if we now specify here a value, then this is going to be the name of the custom event linked to this emitter. So if we now retry our application, we are going to see that everything is still working as expected. So if we head over here to the console and we hit here, for example, the second card of the list, we are going to see that our custom event is still being triggered. And with this, we have covered Angular component inputs and outputs. What we're going to do next is we're going to start covering several of the core directives of Angular. Let's start with the most commonly used, ng-for and ng-if. Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to present the Angular ng-for core directive. As we have seen on the previous lesson, we have here several course cards displayed, and we have here a certain level of repetition in the template. We have these 3 tags here, and we are adding here, for example, the exact same custom event handler. It would be much better to simply loop through a list of courses and apply only one course tag in our template, especially because our data is already available in an array. This would also simplify here our application component. So let's start refactoring this and use the ng-for directive for presenting our list of courses. The first thing that we are going to do is we are going to make the courses array available here. We are going to make available to the template not only these 3 courses, but we are actually going to present the complete list of courses. So imagine what it would be if here we would have somewhere between 7 and 10 courses here in this template. It would be very repetitive. Let's then continue to refactor here our component. We have added here a variable called courses, which contains the complete courses list, and we can now go ahead and remove these 3 variables that we were using here. So we are no longer going to refer to the courses one by one with separate member variables. Instead, what we're going to do is we are going to use the Angular ng-for structural directive in order to loop through the list of courses. And here is the syntax for ng-for. we're going to start here with the star. This is a shorthand syntax for structural directives, which we will be covering in detail later in this course. A structural directive, such as the name implies, allows us to change the structure of the page based here on a JavaScript expression. So in this case, we want to pass in here an expression that will loop through a list of courses. The looping expression is identical to plain JavaScript. This is the same expression that we would use when looping through a collection in TypeScript. ng4 is going to create a local course loop variable that is going to contain each of the courses being looped. Now we can take this variable here and we can pass it as the input of the course card custom HTML element. Let's then see ng4 in action. After refreshing the application, if we scroll down, we are going to see that not only we have here the first 3 cards, but notice here there are more cards available. So all the elements of the courses array are being displayed on the screen. So we have here a directive that allows us to generate new components by looping through a data array available at the level of our component. If we click into the courses array available on the DB data file, so this is just some test data that we are using to build our program, we are going to see that indeed all the courses in this file are being displayed here on the screen. Besides the core iteration functionality, ng4 also comes with some additional features. Let's start with the first auxiliary feature, which is going to be the index feature. So let's say that we want to add here a number to the course. We would like to number the courses from 1 up until the last sequential number of the course. We can do that very easily in the following way. We are going to add here a semicolon after the let of syntax, and we're going to access here the index built-in variable that is provided by the ng4 directive. And we are actually going to rename it so that we can use it easily here in our template. We are going to pass in here an alternative name to our index, which is simply going to be called the e variable. Now we need to somehow pass the current index of the card to the course card itself, and we're going to do that using here a new input parameter that we are about to create. We are going to call this index parameter card index, and we're going to pass it the value e plus 1 because e is 0 based. E starts at 0, 1, 2, etc. So we are adding here plus 1. If we move here into the card, we are going to create here another input. We are going to call it card index like we did in the previous template, and we're going to declare it as being of type number. Next, we are going to go here to our template, and just before here the course description, we are going to add here the card index. We are going to append here a space, and we are going to concatenate here the course description. If we reload this, we are going to see that indeed we have here the numerical value 1, 2, 3, etc. all the way up until 10. ng4 also provides us a couple of extra features. So not only we have here access to the index of the current element that is being looped, but we also have access to the information if this element is the first element on the list or not. So first is a variable provided by ng4 that will be true only for the case of the first card, and we can rename it using the as syntax to something like, for example, is first. We can now use is first to add a special style here to the first card of the list, for example. In order to add a style to the first course card of the list, we are going to be using the following template syntax. We are going to continue to use the Angular input property syntax in square braces, and we are going to access the class variable of this DOM element. The class property is going to contain the list of CSS classes applied to this HTML element. So we're going to be adding here to the list of CSS classes of this element the class is-first. This is a CSS class that is going to add here a top border only to the first card of the list. The class is available here under the source assets folder. We have here a styles.css file, And if we open this file, we are going to see that we have here a CourseCard.isFirst CSS class that is applying here a couple of simple styles to our first card of the list. Using this class, we can now use it here at the level of the template. We are going to say that we want to apply the isFirst class in all cases of the list. So we have to provide here a Boolean expression that is going to be true if we want to apply the isFirst CSS class to the course card, and it should be false if we don't want to add this class to the element. If we try this out now, we are going to see that the class isFirst is being added to all the elements in the list. Instead of applying the CSS class to all the elements in the list, we would like instead to apply this only to the first element. So for that, we are going to use the isFirst Boolean variable that we have available here, and now this top border is only visible for the first card in the list. In a very similar way to the first variable, we also have access to a last Boolean variable. And this variable works in a very similar way to isFirst. So let's apply here a class called isLast, and this class will only be applied to the last element of our list. So it's very similar to the CSS that we have here, but we are applying a bottom border this time around. So if we try this out, we can see that isFirst is still being applied here. But if we now scroll down here to the bottom of the list, we are going to see that here at the end, we have here the last card course with the bottom border. And if we inspect the card element here using the Chrome Dev tools, we are going to see that indeed this course card here has a CSS class isLast. In a very similar way to the first and last variables, we also have an even and odd variable pair. Let's quickly declare here the variables. So first we are going to declare even as isEven, and then we are going to declare odd as isOdd. Now we have these two variables available, and we can apply them here to our template in a very similar way. So we have a CSS class isEven that is only going to be applied if the isEven variable is set to true, and the equivalent is going to be done for the CSS isOdd that is only going to be applied to an element if the element is odd. So these two classes isEven and isOdd are simply going to apply a different color background to each of the cards. Let's have a look at the CSS classes in action. If we refresh the application, we can see that the even elements of our list have a light gray background, while the odd elements have here a light cyan background. And this matches the styles that we have here. As we can see, even elements are light gray and odd elements are light cyan, just like we see here on the screen. And with this, we have covered all the auxiliary features of ng4. Let's now cover another Angular core directive. We're going to see how can we add or remove conditionally certain elements from the page. We're going to be doing that using the ngIf core directive. Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to talk about a new structural directive in Angular core. This is the ngIf directive that is useful for conditionally displaying or hiding from the user certain parts of the page. Let's give a concrete example for this very commonly used functionality. For example, here at the level of our course card, we can see that every course that we are displaying here has an image. And this is because here in our DB data file, all the courses belonging to this array have an icon URL property that is being used here to display the image. Now imagine what would happen if one of these courses would not have here an icon URL property. Let's remove the icon URL property from the first course and reload the application. And now take a look at what happens. We have here the browser symbol for a broken image, and we have here an alternative text for the image. The reason why we are getting displayed here this text with a broken image is because we are defining here an alt property in our course card component, and this contains the text being displayed. Then this broken image that we see here, this is standard browser functionality. The browser will display this whenever the source property is not correctly filled in. What we would like to do in this situation is, instead of displaying here this broken image, we would prefer to hide the image tag completely and replace it with something else. And this would happen depending on the presence of the icon URL property. The expression that we pass to ngIf works in the following way. If the expression is evaluated to true, then we're going to see that the element onto which we are applying ngIf, in this case the image, will still be present on the screen. But if this expression evaluates to false instead, then the image is going to get hidden. As we can see, the image is no longer present, and if we inspect here our application, we are going to see that not only the image is hidden, but it was instead completely removed from the page. So there is no hidden HTML element here that is still present on the page, hidden with CSS. What happens here with ngIf is that the content is completely removed from the DOM, from the page itself. Notice that we don't have to pass in the values true or false to ngIf. We can instead pass any JavaScript expression. We can also pass here a reference to course.iconURL, which is a string and not a boolean, and it can potentially be undefined. But even though this is a string and not a boolean, the ngIf structural directive is going to coerce this value into a boolean. So in this case, the value undefined of this first Angular Core Deep Dive course is going to cause the image to be hidden. So this expression here, in the case of this course card, is getting evaluated to false because icon URL is undefined. And for all other courses in the list, because we have an icon URL property defined, this ngIf expression is going to be evaluated to true, and so the image will be displayed on the card. We don't have to pass only booleans or strings to ngIf. We could potentially pass an object, and if the object is undefined, then it would be evaluated to false. Any other object would be evaluated to true. We can also pass in here a function call. For example, we can create here a new method called isImageVisible. This method needs to be available here at the level of our component, and from here we can return a boolean to the template indicating if the image should be visible or not. In this case, we are going to say that the image is visible if the course property is defined and if the course property has an icon URL property also defined. So as you can see, if we reload here the page, we can see that the same logic is still working as expected. Let's give another example of how to use ngIf. Let's say that we have here in our list of courses an undefined object here at the beginning. So by some reason, this data here is not available, but it was accidentally passed on to our view. Let's see what problem would this cause. So now if we reload the application, we can see that it looks like everything is broken now. And if we check here on the console, we have here the error message, cannot read property description of undefined. And here is the name of the component that is causing the issue. It's the course card component. And we can see that it's this expression here, course.description, that is causing the problem to occur. So the problem is that we are passing in the value undefined here to the input course, and then this value is being accessed here using the standard JavaScript dot notation for accessing properties. Course is undefined, so course.description is going to cause this error here. One way of avoiding this situation would be to use what we call the Elvis operator. We simply add here a question mark evaluation of the property, and then we're going to see that somehow the results are slightly different. We have here a different error message. Now the problem is here at the level of the long description property. So we can fix that, and now we have here a running program where we have here an initial card that is displaying incorrect values, but still at least the program is not crashing. And we have here our core deep dive where the image is absent because the icon URL property is undefined. And here we have the other cards that are working correctly. Now what we would like to do here is to avoid the use of the Elvis operator in multiple places of the template. Because if the course is not available, then it really doesn't make sense to try to display the course card. So what we're going to do here is we are going to guard against this error scenario by using the ngIf directive. Let's apply here ngIf and let's simply pass it the course object. If the course object is already defined, then the card is going to be displayed. On the other hand, if the course object is not available, then due to the ngIf directive, this whole section here is going to get hidden, and we will no longer see here this incorrect result. Let's have a look at this in action. After refreshing the application, we can see that now that initial undefined card has been hidden, and we are instead displaying directly the second element of the array, the Angular Core Deep Dive course, as expected. So as we can see, by adding here ngIf at the level of the outer container of our component, we have avoided the use here of the Elvis operator to avoid undefined errors. Another commonly used feature of ngIf is an else clause. So let's say that we don't have here an image to display to the user, but we would like to show to the user something else, such as, for example, a small amount of text that says that no image is available. We can do that by using here an else clause. We simply add here an else, and then we need to pass in here a reference to a template block that is going to contain our message. So let's create here a template block. We are going to do that using ngTemplate, and we are going to give this template block a name. We are going to call it noImage. So we are using here the template reference hash syntax that we have seen before. We're going to take here our message and we are going to paste it here inside the template block. Now we are going to take this template reference noImage and we're going to add it here in our else clause. Let's now quickly see this logic in action. We are going to refresh the application and we're going to see that we have here the no image is available message displayed on the screen, but only in the case of the first card where no image is available. In the remainder of the cards, we are correctly displaying the image as expected. And with this we have covered ngIf, which is one of the most commonly used directives in Angular. Next, we are going to talk about the ngClass and ngStyle directives that we are going to be using for styling our Angular components. Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we are going to start to talk about component styling and we are going to introduce the ngClass core directive. As we have seen before, many of the styles that we are using here are coming here from this global styles.css file. We can also add styles locally at the level of the component, as we will see. Right now, let's talk about a particular type of styles, which are conditional styles. These are styles that are added to sections of the page depending on the content of the data. So unlike the styles that we have here, such as for example the course card class, there could be a class that is added here to our course card depending on if, for example, the course is of category beginner or not. Let's now go ahead and add such a conditional class to our component. We're going to add it directly here at the level of the component CSS file itself, which is currently empty. We are going to first start by writing our CSS selector, and what we are going to target is this container div here that is wrapping the whole course card component. Let's then create a style that targets any element that has applied this course card class, and let's add here an extra CSS class beginner. So this CSS class is also known as a state class. This state class is going to be applied only to courses of type beginner. Let's make this beginner class very visible in our screen. We are going to add here a bright color, such as for example this one. And let's try this out to see if this style is working correctly. So if we head over here to our course card component, let's quickly add here the beginner CSS class and see that indeed we can very quickly spot a card with this style, but the style, as we can see here, is being applied to all the cards. We want to apply it only to certain courses. Let's then start by removing here the CSS class and see how can we apply styles using ngClass instead. ngClass is a core directive that comes bundled with Angular. So with the ngClass directive, we're going to be able to pass an argument that is going to turn on or off certain CSS classes. The expression that we pass in here to ngClass can take several forms. We can pass to ngClass a string, we can pass also an array, and we can also pass it a configuration object. Let's explore the three possibilities. Let's see, for example, how can we pass a class that we want to activate using a string. We can do so by passing in a string here and passing the beginner CSS class. So as you can see, this string that gets received gets interpreted as CSS, and the CSS class is added to the page. Now notice one thing, this string does not have to contain only one CSS class. We could potentially add here several CSS classes separated by a space. So if we try this out, you can see that the style has remained unchanged and our cards look the same as before. It's not recommended to apply this type of styles that are constant using ngClass. These type of styles are better applied using the CSS class property as usual. ngClass is really meant only for conditional styles. Another thing that we can pass to ngClass instead of a string is an array. So we can pass in here an array of strings containing a list of all the CSS classes that we want to apply to a given element. So again, if we pass in here these two CSS classes, we are going to see that they are being correctly applied here to our template as expected. Another thing that we can pass to ngClass is a configuration object. So instead of passing a string or an array of strings, we can instead pass in here an object whose properties are the names of the CSS classes that we want to apply and whose values are true or false depending on if we want to apply the style or not. So as we can see, our styles are still working as expected, but if we now set here the beginner class to false, we are going to see that the beginner class is no longer being applied to the template. Now notice the following about ngClass. We don't have to pass in here as the expression passed to ngClass directly an object that is hard-coded here at the level of the template. Instead, what we can do is we can call a function that returns us this configuration object. This is actually the recommended approach in order to keep the template readable. So we are going to call here a new method called card classes, and we are going to create this new method here at the level of our component. So this method is going to return to the template the same thing that we were returning before. Let's start here with a simple example. We are going to return here a configuration object, which was the last example that we gave. Notice that this method could also return a string or an array of strings like we have seen before. Those are also accepted by ngClass. So if we try this out, we are going to see that again, we still have here the correct styles applied. If we return here the value true, we are going to see that now the beginner class is being applied as expected. So this is a better way of adding some conditional styling to our class to call a method and add here our logic in TypeScript. We are going to now apply the logic of only activating this class for beginner courses, and we are going to do that in the following way. We are going to access here course, we are going to access the category property, and we are going to check if the category property is equal to beginner. If that is the case, then the CSS class is going to be applied because we have here true. Otherwise, this is not going to be applied because we get false. Let's see this in action. If we now hit refresh, we are going to see that our beginner class is only being applied to certain courses. And if we confirm the courses that are receiving the CSS class here in our DB data file, we are going to see that indeed the first beginner class on the list, it's this RxJS in practice course. So the style is being correctly applied as expected. Before giving a few more examples, let's take the time to remove this class here from our configuration object, because as mentioned, we should only define here styles that are conditionally applied. So this style is better applied here at the level of the class property. Now let's take a moment to see how this conditional styling logic could have been written in a simpler way. So returning a configuration object is only one possibility, like we saw before. So let's rewrite this so that we return instead a string. So what we're going to do is we are going to add here an if clause. We are going to test inside this if clause if this is a beginner course, and if that's the case, we are going to return here either an array containing the beginner string, or we can also return the string directly. Let's start first with the example of an array. We are going to try this example out and see if everything is working correctly. So as you can see, the style is indeed being correctly applied, and we don't get here any errors at the level of the console. So our logic is working correctly. Here, instead of returning an array because we only have one element, we can also return here a string directly. And again, the logic is being correctly applied. And with this, we have covered the ng-class core directive. Let's quickly summarize when is this directive meant to be used. We should use ng-class whenever we want to add or remove a style to our template, depending on the content of the data. Typically, we only use ng-class to add or remove a few styles per component. ng-class is not meant to replace the CSS class property. So if the styles are constant and they are always associated to an HTML element, we should add them in the CSS class property as usual. Let's now move on to our next Angular core directive, ng-style. Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the Angular ng-style core directive. So as we have seen in the last lesson, we can use ng-class to add CSS classes to our component conditionally, depending on the value of the course data, for example. In the same way that we want to add CSS classes conditionally, we might also want to add CSS styles directly. Most of the time, we are going to be able to style our components by simply using plain CSS classes and nothing more. But there are occasions where we would like to apply a style directly to a component. Let's then quickly apply a style to one of these elements and see how styling works without using ng-style first. Let's say that, for example, we would like to make this text here, the title of the card, underlined. We can do that using the input template syntax in the following way. We are going to access the style property of our element. So this is a DOM property. This is not Angular specific. And we are going to write into it a value under the text decoration property. So we are going to say that the text decoration style element of this course title div here is going to have the value underline. So if we refresh here our application, we are going to see that now all the cards have here an underlined title. Now imagine that instead of only one style, we would like to apply multiple styles to this div. So we would have to use multiple times this syntax, one for each style. A more convenient way of applying multiple styles to an element is to use instead the ng-style directive. So we are going to be using again the input syntax, but this time we are using ng-style. ng-style is going to take here on the right hand side a configuration object whose properties are the styles that we want to modify. So in this case we want to modify the text decoration property, and whose values are the value of the property itself. So in this case we want to set text decoration to underline, and if we would like to add here multiple other styles, we can do so via this configuration object by providing here multiple properties. So as you can see, the underline is still being applied here to our card title. Now we can also pass here an expression to ng-style, like it happened here in the case of ng-class. We can, in a similar way, call here a function that we are going to be creating here at the level of our component. This function can return a configuration object just like we did for ng-class. So we can return here our configuration object, and if we try this out, we are going to see that everything is still working just like before, but this makes it much simpler to turn on and off certain styles programmatically here at the level of the template, as we have access here to the course input object. Notice that we could also access the course object here, but if we start adding too much logic to our template, then the template becomes less readable. Instead of adding too much logic here, it's better to simply call a function at the level of our component and implement here our logic in TypeScript. And just like it happened before in the case of ng class, we really want to avoid to have constant values here. We should only define here styles using ng style for properties that are dynamic and depend on the content of the data. Let's give here a quick example. Imagine that instead of displaying here the course image using the image tag, we would like to display the image as a CSS background of this card here. So in order to do that, we would need the following CSS property. We will need to set background-image. So this is a CSS property that can be applied to any div that is going to apply a given image as the background of a section of the page. In order for this to work, we need to call URL and we need to pass in here a complete URL to the image that we want to use as background. So we can concatenate here the icon URL of our course, for example. And we could add here multiple other dynamic properties if needed. Before trying this out, let's switch back here to our example. We were accidentally applying here our styles here only to the title. We want to instead apply this new dynamic style to the complete card. So if we now try this out, we are going to see that our div is receiving as its background the course image as intended. As you can see, there are a lot of options for styling our components. Let's put back here our image and quickly discuss the multiple options that we have available for styling our components. So most of the times we want to style our components with plain CSS classes, such as the one that we have here. That is the most common way of styling our components. We should not use systematically ng class or ng style. ng class should be used a lot more frequently than ng style. ng class is meant for conditionally adding or removing classes depending on the content of our data. So typically we want to use ng class only for CSS state classes that indicate the presence of a given state in our component. On the other hand, sometimes there are certain CSS properties that we want to populate depending on the data. An example of that type of property is the background image property, as we have seen. So if we run into that case when we want to set a particular CSS property with data-dependent content, for that we can use ng style. We are going to learn still a lot more about styling in the next few sections. Right now, let's continue covering the main Angular core directives. Let's talk about ng switch. Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson, we are going to introduce the Angular ng switch core directive. So as we have seen, we can conditionally add or remove elements to a page if using the ng if core directive. ng if is useful in the case when we want to add the element to the page depending on a condition, or we want to remove it. So there are only two possibilities. But there are many other cases where we have more than these two possibilities. For example, here in the case of the category property of each course. Let's say that we want to add here a label that identifies if the course is beginner, intermediate or advanced. Let's see how ng switch is going to help us to create here a category label just above here the view course button. So we are going to go here to our template, and here just below the course description, we are going to add here a new div, and we are going to add it the CSS class course category. Now inside this container, we are going to add the category itself. The category is going to be simply a div, which is going to have the class category. Let's add here the beginner category, for example. So if we now try this out, we are going to see that the beginner tag is being added to all the courses. Instead of adding this to every course, we want to add this depending on the value of the course category. We can do that in the following way. We are going to apply here the ng switch directive. So this is going to work in a similar way to a JavaScript switch statement. We are going to choose the expression onto which we want to switch on, which is going to be the course category itself. And then, depending on the value of the category, we are going to show or not here the beginner category. So one of the cases that we want to show is indeed the beginner category, and we are going to identify that via a case clause. We're going to add here the ng switch case structural directive here with the asterisk syntax. This case is going to be considered active if the value of this expression, course.category, is identical to beginner. So in this case, we are going to be showing this label. If we now try this out, we are going to see that only the courses that are beginner courses have the beginner tag as expected. We also want to add here, for example, the case of intermediate courses. So we are going to add here the matching expression intermediate, and we are going to fix here our label. So if we try this out, we are going to see that now certain courses get applied here the intermediate tag. And the same goes for the advanced tag. So we want to add here a third possibility, advanced courses. So if we try this out, we are going to see that indeed certain courses now have here the advanced tag. Now we also want to cover the possibility when the course category expression does not match any of the known cases. In that case, we want to write the category all levels. We can do that by applying the following directive, the ng switch default structural directive. So in order to see the all levels tag, we are going to have to go here to our db data file that contains the data that we are displaying, and let's, for example, go to the first course and remove here the category property. So if we now try this out, we are going to see that indeed we have here the all levels tag displayed as expected. So as you can see, the main difference between ng switch and ng if is that here with ng switch we can cover multiple alternative cases very easily, and we can even provide a default case. This is unlike ng if, where we really only have two possibilities. And with this we have covered the multiple options available with ng switch. Let's now talk about another very commonly used Angular core directive, ng container. Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we are going to start to introduce the notion of Angular pipes. So what exactly is a pipe? A pipe is a template mechanism that we can use to transform data and display it in another form to the user. Let's give a concrete example. Let's add here a very common type of data, which is a date. Let's add here a start date at the level of our application component. And for the sake of this example, let's quickly instantiate the date using the date constructor. So we are going to add here the 1st of January of 2000. So the months are 0 based and the days of the month are 1 based. So this corresponds to the 1st of January of 2000. Let's say that we would like to display this date here at the level of our template. We're going to quickly add here a small container where we are going to try out multiple pipes. We're going to add here a CSS class called demo, and we're going to start quickly adding here some data. Let's add here the start date, for example, that we have available here from the component, and see how this gets displayed on the screen. So if we refresh here the application, we are going to see that our start date looks like this. This is not very helpful for the user. This is not a typical way that we want to display a date. In order to better display the data to the user, let's apply here an Angular pipe using the following syntax. We add this vertical bar here, and then after it we add here the name of the pipe that we want to apply, in this case the date pipe. Let's quickly see this in action. So as you can see, what we have now in the template is a properly formatted date string. What happened here is that the pipe is essentially a function that is going to take as input the start date, and it's going to give us as output this formatted string that we have here. This pipe here, which is essentially a function, can take several arguments. So for example, what we have here is a default format for a date, but we can specify our own format, let's say, that separates the month and the year with a slash instead of having here a comma and a space. So we can apply here a parameter to our pipe by applying here a colon, and then between quotes as a string, we are going to add here the formatting that we want. We are going to say that we want first the month, then the day, and then we're going to say that we want the year with only 2 digits. So as you can see, we have here the date correctly displayed. Now let's say that we want 4 digits for the year instead. We have here 2000 as expected. And let's say that instead of this format, we would like to show here a string for the month. So January, February, etc. In order to do that, we apply the following format here with 3 M's instead of 2. And if we refresh this, we are going to see that we have here January 1st, 2000. So now we have a string instead of digits for the month as expected. If by some reason our pipe needs multiple arguments, then we can pass them by separating the multiple arguments with another colon. We will see examples of that in a moment. So this is the date pipe. It's very useful for displaying dates. As we can see, there are several other built-in pipes in Angular core. Let's have a look at them. Besides the date pipe, we also have other pipes that are available for string formatting. Let's create here a member variable called title, which is going to correspond to the title of the first course of our list. Let's go back here to the list. So the title is going to correspond to this string here, Angular Core Deep Dive. As you can see, this is title cased. Let's make it a normal sentence without capitalization first. So going back here to our example in our application component, we're going to see that we have here a couple of pipes available for formatting strings. We are going to first start by simply printing the title out. So as you can see, we have here Angular Core Deep Dive. Let's now see what happens if we apply a couple of built-in pipes. We have, for example, the uppercase pipe that, like one would expect, simply takes the string and makes it all uppercase. Another pipe that is related to this one is the lowercase pipe that will, as the name implies, make the whole string lowercase. We also have the built-in title case pipe. Like the name implies, the title case pipe is going to capitalize only the first letter of each word. Besides the pipes for formatting strings, we also have a built-in pipe for formatting number amounts. So if we head over here to our component, we are going to add here a new variable called price, and we're going to assign it the value $9.99. Let's now see the multiple options that we have available for displaying this price on the screen. For that, the pipe that we are going to be using is going to be the number pipe. Let's try it out. So as you can see, if we don't pass in here any extra arguments, we are going to have the number just like it is displayed on the screen. But the number pipe can take several arguments. So the first argument is going to be the minimal number of integer digits. So in this case, let's say that we want a minimum of 3 integer digits here left of the comma. Then we can also provide here the number of minimal fraction digits. Let's say that we have a minimum of 3 digits and a maximum of 5 fraction digits. We need to add here a colon so that this string here is considered an argument passed to the number pipe. So if we try this out, we are going to see that indeed we have here 3 integer digits and we have here 3 fraction digits as expected. 5 would be the number of maximum digits in case that we would provide here more digits. With this formatting, if our price has a bit more than 5 digits, then what is going to happen is that our fraction part is going to get rounded to a maximum of 5 fraction digits. This pipe is ideal for formatting any numeric amount in general, but if we want to format a price in a currency, then we also have available another pipe, which is the currency pipe. So let's have a look here. If we apply it without any argument, we are going to see that it defaults to US dollars. And we can see that this price here was rounded to 2 digits. Now let's say that we want to display another currency instead of US dollars, let's say euros. We are going to see that we have here the correct currency symbol applied, and the same goes for any other currency. When we are displaying numeric amounts, another very common use case is when we have to display a percentage. Let's say that we have here a new member variable called rate, and this corresponds to a percentage, let's say of 67%. We can display this here on the screen in the following way. We are going to take the rate member variable and we are going to apply it the percent built-in Angular pipe. So as we can see, our percentage is correctly displayed on the screen as expected. Besides pipes for formatting strings or numeric amounts, we also have built-in pipes available for handling collections of data. For example, we have the built-in slice pipe that will allow us to slice an array in a similar way to what we would do with the JavaScript array slice operator. So here is how the slice pipe works. We are going to apply it here to our courses collection, and we are going to slice only the first three elements of our array. So the first element that we want to include, it's going to be the element 0, which corresponds to this card here, and the second argument that we're going to pass to the slice pipe is going to be the end index that we want to slice. So we should expect to see here the cards 0 and 1, but not the card 2, so the final index here is non-inclusive. Let's have a look at this. If we now refresh here our application, we're going to see that only the indexes 0 and 1 from our courses array were included, and index 2 was not included as expected. Besides the slice pipe, there are a couple of other built-in pipes for handling JavaScript objects and arrays. One pipe that is very useful for debugging purposes is the JSON pipe. Let's take, for example, here our courses array and apply it the JSON pipe. So if we refresh here the application, we can see that the courses array is being printed out to the screen. So this is very useful for debugging, for confirming that a given member variable contains the data that we expect. Another pipe that is quite useful for handling objects is the key value pipe. In order to see the key value pipe in action, let's create here a course object that is going to be the first element of the courses array. So this is not an array, this is a JavaScript object. The key value pipe is very useful for iterating through the properties of this object. Let's see this in action. Let's quickly print out the properties of the course object to the screen. So we are going to create here a loop. We are going to be using ng4 and we are going to loop through all the properties of our object. The course object as it is currently not iterable, but if we apply it here the key value pipe, then we are going to get here an array of key values and we can loop through that with ng4. So let's call each of the key value pairs a pair. We are then going to iterate over the array of key value pairs by using the let of syntax. And here inside this ng4 loop, we are going to get here our key value pair. You can print it to the screen in the following way. We are going to first start by printing out the pair key, and we can already see that here on the screen. We can see that we have here printed out the names of the course object properties, and we can also print out the value. So we are going to separate the value here with a colon, and we are going to access the value, and we're going to print it out to the screen. So as we refresh our application, we're going to see that we have here the multiple property values of the course object. And with this, you now have a good overview on all the built-in Angular pipes. Next, we are going to start to introduce some of the more advanced features of Angular core. We are going to start with local template querying with the viewChild decorator. This is coming right up in the next lesson. Hello everyone and welcome back. So far in this Angular Core deep dive course, we have been focusing on the Angular view layer. This so far has been all about how to build our views using tree of components with different Angular features. Now what we're going to talk about is the service layer. This is the layer that is going to contact the database and that it's going to interact with the view in order to display data on the screen. This is now a great time to get a new starting point for our section. We're going to head over here to the Angular University repository for this course, the Angular Core Deep Dive course. You can scroll down and confirm that you are in the correct repository, and we are going to head over here to the branch dropdown. This time around we are going to grab this branch, the free services branch. We are going to click into it, and now using here the clone or download button, we can either download this branch as a zip file, or we can head over to our IDE, and in our terminal we can switch branches using the following command: git checkout -b. Let's add here the name of the local branch. That could be anything, but we are going to give it the same name, free-services, and we are going to clone here the free-services remote branch. So once you run this command, you are going to get the new code for this section. Once you have the code installed, we are going to start here our front-end server, and it's very important that you started using npm start and not the ngserve command. After a moment, you should have here your program up and running. Now, before starting with this section, it's important to open a second terminal window, and this time around we are going to run a small HTTP backend server. We are going to do so using the following command: npm run server. You are then going to see here a new server running on port 9000. This is a small REST API server. This is going to allow us to query an actual backend and display the data on the screen using the Angular HTTP service. That's what we are about to do. Now, before going any further, it's important to confirm that your server is working correctly and that you don't have here a blocked port or something similar. Now, in order to confirm that, we are going to head over here to the port localhost 9000, and don't access here the root of this server because there is no route configured and you're going to get a 404. Instead, we're going to access /API/courses. And if you do so, you should get here some JSON on the screen displaying here a list of courses. Now, I'm using here a plugin in order to pretty print the JSON here on the browser, but if you are not using it, you are going to get here the raw JSON that will look something like this. In all cases, we did not get here a 404, and we have confirmed that our server is up and running. Great, so the next thing that we are going to do is we are going to confirm that the application is working correctly. So we are going to refresh here the application, and we see that we have here a slightly different starting point than what we had before. If we inspect here our application component, we are going to see that this data here is not coming from the backend. We are still receiving it here from the courses variable, which is simply a hard-coded value here in our dbdata.ts file. What we're going to do next is, instead of grabbing the data here directly just from a file, we are going to query this backend that we have running here on the second terminal, and we're going to grab that data that we saw here in the browser, that JSON, and we're going to display it on the screen. So we will no longer be using here the courses hard-coded value, and our application will be a little bit closer to what you will see in practice. Let's then get started with our new Angular services and dependency injection section. Hello everyone and welcome back. Let's get started learning Angular injectable services, and the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to learn how to use an already existing Angular built-in service. Later on, we are going to learn how to build our own custom services. The service that we are going to use is the Angular HTTP service that we are going to be using to fetch some data from the backend. In order to use a service, we can simply inject it into our class via the constructor. We simply have to declare here a reference to the service, and Angular will know when it instantiates this class that it needs to provide this dependency. We're going to declare this as the HTTP member variable, and we are going to define here the type of the HTTP variable. We are going to define it as being of type HTTP client. HTTP client is the Angular HTTP service. Later in this course, we are going to learn how to build our own custom services. Right now, let's see how can we use this service. And a good place to use it is this ng-on-init method. This is another lifecycle hook that we are introducing here. ng-on-init is the best place to put some initialization logic, such as, for example, triggering an HTTP backend call that is going to fetch fetch the data that this component needs. This is a lifecycle hook, which means that this method is going to be called by the Angular framework itself and not by us directly. This is not meant to be called from the application code. In order to instantiate the application component class, Angular is going to invoke the constructor and pass the multiple dependencies. Once that is done, the next thing that Angular is going to do is to call this method. So in this method ngOnInit, we are sure that we already have here something present. So this means that this ngOnInit method will already have available the HTTP member variable because it's called after the constructor. Let's have a look to see what can we do with the HTTP method. We can, for example, do an HTTP GET. We are going to pass in here the URL that we want to hit in our backend, and we're going to use /API/courses. Notice that what we get back here in our get method is going to be an observable. So if we try this out just like it is, nothing will happen. Because it's an observable, we need to subscribe to it in order to trigger it. So let's do that. We are going to call here the subscribe method, and we're going to add here a success handler. So this is a function that is going to get us back the value returned by the API call to /API/courses. Let's quickly log it out to the console. We are going to log out here the value, and before trying anything else, let's see how this is working. We are going to refresh the application, and we're going to open here our console to see that indeed we have here an array containing 10 courses as expected. So this data came here from the backend and not from this hard-coded data that we have assigned here to the courses member variable. Let's now, instead of logging out these values to the console, let's pass these values here to the courses member variable. So initially we are going to leave it undefined. This means that whenever we loop here through the array of courses, nothing is present and we get here a blank screen. And if now here in our subscribe success handler, we take this value, which is the array of courses, and we assign it here to the courses member variable, we are going to see that again we get here some data on the screen. But this time around, the data comes here from this HTTP request and not directly from a hard-coded value, just like we were doing so far. And with this, we have completed our first HTTP request. Since we are doing here a GET request, let's take a moment to see how could we add GET parameters to it. So in order to add parameters to a request, we are going to define here a new constant. We are going to call it params, and we are going to instantiate it using the Angular HTTP params utility class. Now, this class has an immutability-based API. If we want to change here the parameters that are being passed, which is currently no parameters at all, we need to call here the set method. Now let's add here an HTTP parameter. So this is the name of the parameter that is going to show up on the query string. Let's say that we would like to get page number 1 of the list of courses. We're going to pass in here the value. This should be a string, so we're going to pass here page number 1, and let's say that we would like to add here a second parameter. In that case, we are going to call set here again. Let's say that the second parameter is page size, and we want the first 10 courses. So we have here a set of HTTP parameters. We simply have to pass them to this get call here in the second argument of the get request. So we're going to pass in here an object. This object can have here multiple properties, including here the params property that we are filling in with the params constant. Let's now try this out. We're going to switch to a larger window and we are going to reload here the application. We have here the Chrome DevTools opened and we are filtering here for AJAX calls only. So here is the AJAX call that is being made by our application, and we can see here on the request URL that we are indeed accessing here API/courses, and we have here the parameters page 1 with page size 10. So as we can see, everything is working as expected. Let's now talk about some other features of the Angular built-in HTTP client. We're going to talk about a better way of passing the data to our template using the async pipe, and we're going to learn how to build our own custom services. Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to introduce a new pipe, the async pipe. This pipe is great for handling asynchronous data, such as for example the courses data that we are receiving here. Notice first that what we are doing here is we are doing an HTTP GET call and we are manually subscribing to the observable that we get here as the result of the GET call. The async pipe is going to allow us to implicitly subscribe to this observable from the template, and it's going to allow us to build our components in a more reactive way. Notice that here we are defining a variable called courses that could lead the maintainer of this class to try to mutate this variable directly, for example. Now, in order to avoid that, we are going to alternatively define here a courses observable variable, and we're going to add here a dollar at the end of the variable to annotate it as being an observable, and we're going to declare this as an observable of course array. This simply means that the values emitted by this observable over time are going to be each value an array of courses. So we are going to, instead of calling here the get observable, we are going to instead assign it to this variable. So this dot courses is going to be identical to this observable here returned by this get call. We can even add here a parametric type to the get call in order to specify what type is getting returned by this get call, in this case course array. Notice that at this point the courses member variable is no longer being filled in by the component, so we are going to clear it from the component. Now let's see how in the template we can use the courses observable. If we switch here to the template, we are going to see that we are still expecting here a variable called courses, and we want to iterate through a list of courses. We can obtain this courses variable from the courses observable by subscribing to it. We are going to wrap this in parentheses. We are going to take the courses observable and we are going to apply it the async pipe. The async pipe is a special built-in Angular pipe that is going to take the courses observable and it's going to subscribe to it. The async pipe would also work with a promise. So we are going to subscribe to this observable, we are going to wait for the value to get emitted, and that will happen when the list of courses arrives from the backend. Once that happens, the value of this expression here is going to be replaced with the value that we got from the backend, so the list of courses. Then we're going to iterate through it using ng4, and we're going to display it on the screen. Let's try this out. If we reload here the application, we are going to see that indeed we still have here our list of courses as expected. Now let's quickly see an alternative syntax for doing the same thing that we have here. We are going to be using here the ngIf syntax. We are going to apply here this expression, courses pipe async, and we are going to give this expression an alias name. For that, we are going to use the ngIf as syntax, and we are going to provide here to this expression an alternative name, courses. This means that here in our ng4 loop, we can use courses to loop through the course cards. So if we try this out, as we can see, we still get here the same list of courses as expected. In general, if you are fetching data from a backend and you are receiving an observable in return from a service in your service layer, I would recommend to pass the data to the template using the async pipe, because this has the big advantage that whenever the component gets destroyed, the async pipe will take care of unsubscribing from the observable. And this is very helpful in order to prevent memory leaks. Let's now continue to learn about Angular services. Let's learn how to build our first custom Angular service. Hello everyone and welcome back. In the last lesson we saw how to use a built-in Angular service, the HTTP client. As you can see, we just injected here in our constructor and we have access here to an HTTP API. What we're going to do now is we are going to create our own custom Angular service. This is going to be a custom Angular service that we are going to write ourselves from scratch. Let's then see what an Angular custom service looks like. We are going to head over here to our terminal and we're going to quickly scaffold a new service by running the following command: ng generate. We are going to use the service template and we're going to place the service in a services folder. This is going to be the courses service. This scaffolding command is going to generate here a couple of files. Let's have a look here at the courses service file. So as you can see, this is a plain TypeScript class where we have added here an injectable decorator. This means that this service here is injectable in our component, just like the HTTP client. Going back here to our courses service, you can see here that inside the injectable decorator, we have here a provided in property. We are going to cover in detail what this property means later in this course. Right now, what is important to retain is that this is an injectable service that is compatible with the Angular dependency injection system. Let's talk a bit about dependency injection. So as you can see, our class here does not have to create its own dependencies, such as for example the HTTP client. This class depends on the HTTP client because it needs it internally in order to perform some of its functions. Now, the class will not create the HTTP client. The class will be provided the HTTP client via the constructor. Notice that the class does not know where the HTTP client is coming from, how it was created, and it doesn't even know if this is a test implementation or if it's the real HTTP client. All that it knows is that somehow this dependency was created and it was provided to the class via the constructor. So the class does not create its dependencies, it gets them injected via the constructor. That is called dependency injection. Angular has a powerful dependency injection system that we are going to cover in detail in this course. This configuration property here means that we should create an instance of this service and only one instance of courses service and have it available at the root of the dependency injector. This means that there will be only one instance available for the whole application. If we head over here to our application component, we will see that we can even already inject this dependency here in the constructor. Let's try this out to see if this is working. We simply have to add here the courses service type annotation, and this is all the information needed by Angular in order to be able to inject here an instance of courses service. Let's then confirm that this is working. We are going to log here to the console the value of this service. If we now reload the application and we open the console, we are going to see that indeed we can see here an instance of courses service injected via the constructor. Now notice the following: if we need here this courses service elsewhere, such as for example here in the course card component, we can add it here as a dependency in the constructor. Let's now confirm that the courses service is also available for injection at the level of the course card component. Let's now refresh the browser and try this out. We have here several logging statements. We have one courses service logging statement for the application component, and then we have here multiple logging occurrences of this line here, one for each card in our application, because as we can see, we have here multiple cards. Now the question is, are these different instances of the courses service class, or is this all the same instance? Due to our configuration here, provide in root, we are sharing only one instance as we have discussed. And the best way to confirm this is to add here some logging at the level of the constructor. We are going to log here simply creating courses service, and we are going to run this and see what we get in the console. The first statement that we would expect to see here is the creation of the service, and that is indeed the case. So here the constructor was called, and again it was called by Angular and not by our application code, and we have here the injection of the application component courses service, which is the same instance as the one that is getting injected here at the level of each course card. The constructor, as we can see on the log, was only called once, which confirms to us that there is indeed only one instance of courses service. This type of service is known as an application singleton. Singleton simply means that there is only one instance. So now that we have here the skeleton implementation of our courses service and that we have an initial understanding of how dependency injection works, let's continue the implementation of courses service. We are now going to see how can we implement our backend call using this class. Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to continue the implementation of our courses service. So what is the purpose of this service class? This class is going to gather a series of commonly used course-related operations that are useful throughout the application. For example, this code that we have here for fetching a list of courses from the backend. This is something that might be useful in several other components of the application other than the application component itself. So if we would like to get the same data elsewhere, we would need to repeat this code. Instead of doing that, what we're going to do is we are going to move this functionality to a service, the courses service, that is going to provide to the view, such as the application component, an observable based API where internally we are fetching the data using our HTTP client. Let's see what this would look like. Let's first switch here to the courses service and start defining the API of our service. So this API will start by having a method called loadCourses, and the return type of this loadCourses method is going to be an observable of course array. This means that the values emitted by the observable returned by loadCourses will be instances of course array. This is the same type of observable that we have here returned by the HTTP GET call. So let's start by injecting here the HTTP client directly in our courses service. As we can see, it's available anywhere in the application where we need it. Now what we're going to do is we are going to take this code and we're going to move it here inside courses service. We are going to define here our parameters and we are going to return this observable here generated by the HTTP GET call to the caller of loadCourses. So our application component will no longer have a direct dependency towards the HTTP client. It will only have a dependency towards the courses service. Now we can obtain the same courses observable that we were obtaining here by calling courses service.loadCourses. And notice that we don't even need here these parameters. So this code for fetching data from the backend is now nicely packed in this function and can be easily reused elsewhere on the application where we need it. Let's try this out. We are going to reload the application, and as we can see, after this refactoring, our application is still working as expected. As we can see, with this refactoring, we have moved all the HTTP specific logic to one central service, making it very easy to call the same HTTP operation in multiple parts of the application, and also abstracting away the implementation detail, which is the HTTP client itself. This component here only knows that the data is getting returned via an observable, but it does not know where the data came from. If it came from a backend, from a browser cache, this component is not aware of that. It simply knows that when the data is available, it's going to be emitted and received by the component via the observable. As you can see, isolating the HTTP logic in a custom injectable service is a good pattern to adopt in our applications. Our code at the level of our components, such as the application component, is going to become much more readable because a call to a method like, for example, loadCourses is much more descriptive than an HTTP call. Besides the readability aspect, this logic might also be needed in several components of our application. So moving it into a common shared service is a great way of reusing the logic across components. Let's now continue the implementation of our courses service. We are now going to show how to use the HTTP client to not only fetch data from the backend, but also to modify it. Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we are going to continue to extend the API of the courses service and we are going to add it a data modification method. We have here an edit title input box that allows us to change the title of the current course. We are going to take the new value of the title and we are going to send it to the backend using an HTTP call. Let's start by defining here the API of the service where we are going to implement this data modification operation. We are going to add here a new method and we're going to call it save course. We are now going to define one parameter of type course. Now let's call this API here from our application component. Let's switch here to the template and see that we need to detect here the event triggered whenever we hit here the Save Course button. If we inspect this version of the course card, we're going to see that we have here a course changed event. So this code version is slightly different than the one that you have built previously in this course. We are going to detect this course changed event, and this event, as we can see, is going to be emitting the course that it receives as input, so the course linked to the card, containing the modified titles. So as you can see, we have used here the object spread operator, and we have created a copy of the course. Then we have overridden only the description property. The description property is coming here from onSaveClicked, and it corresponds to the value of the course title input box. So here it is, the edit title input box. We are going to grab here its value, pass it to onSaveClicked, and from here we are going to emit this in a course changed object. This means that going back here to our application component, we simply have to subscribe to this course changed event and react to it by calling here a method on our application component. We're going to call this method simply save. This is going to take as input a course, and this is going to be received here from the course changed event. We are going to call here the save method, and we're going to pass it the course emitted by the event, which is available via the $event variable, as we have seen. So now inside here our save method, we are going to be able to call our courses service save course method and pass in here the course. Let's now implement the save course method. Here again we are going to be calling the HTTP client. We are going to be doing an HTTP put call. So the same way that we can do a get, we can do a post, can do a delete, and we can also do a put, which is what we are doing here. So here inside our put call, we're going to be specifying the URL that we want to hit. So we are going to be hitting the URL /API/courses, and here we're going to be specifying the ID of the course, which we have available via the course input variable of this method. Notice that the program is not yet compiling, and that's because we need to pass in here a second argument, which is the body of the put call. So now we have a compiling program. We are going to, just like before, return this observable here as the output of save course, and in order to trigger the save course HTTP request, we need to subscribe here to this observable just like before. So if we don't subscribe, nothing will happen and the course will not be saved. Let's log here to the console that the course was saved successfully. Let's now try this out and confirm that everything is working as expected. We are going to rename here the title of the course. Let's say that we are going to call it Angular Core Course. We are going to hit save course, and we're going to inspect here the console. So here at the bottom of the console, and I'm going to click save course again, we can see that we are saving this course to the backend. And if we head over here to the terminal, we're going to see here that in the window that is running our small HTTP REST server, we're going to have here confirmation that we are saving the course to the backend. Now notice what happens if we reload the application. Instead of Angular Core Deep Dive, we have the new title Angular Core Course. So this confirms that our request was correctly processed and that the new data was saved in the server as expected. Now let's say that in this put request that we are doing here in save course, we would like to specify a custom HTTP header. Let's say that we needed to add to this request an authentication header that is identifying the user so that the server can know if the operation is allowed or not. So in order to do that, we are going to define here a new constant. We're going to call it headers, and this will contain our HTTP headers. We can build our HTTP headers in a very similar way to how we were building our HTTP parameters using a class called HTTP headers. This class also has an immutability based API, so we are going to call here our set method, and we are going to specify here the name of the custom header. We are going to follow a convention and prefix with an X dash the custom header. We're going to call it the authentication header, and let's say that we would have here the value of a cookie that would allow us to authenticate this user. Then we would specify here the user ID. Now that we have here some headers already present, we need to pass them here to our HTTP put request. So we're going to do that here via the third argument of the put call. We're going to pass it an object, and here we have several options available. In this case, we are going to specify the headers property, and we're going to pass it this instance of HTTP headers. Let's now confirm that our HTTP header is being properly filled in. We're going to switch to a larger window, reload the application, and we're going to perform here another save call. We are going to clear here the console, and let's rename this to the Angular Core Deep Dive. We're going to save our course, and here we have our put request. If we click on it and we have a look here at the request headers, we're going to see that indeed we have here our custom header correctly filled in as expected. As we can see, Angular makes it really simple to build our own custom injectable services. This is all based on the Angular dependency injection mechanism. Now that we know how to build our own Angular custom service, what we're going to do next is we are going to do a deep dive into the Angular dependency injection system. We're going to understand exactly how this configuration here inside the injectable decorator works, the provided in property, and much more. Hello, welcome, and congratulations on completing the Angular for Beginners course. This course should give you a solid foundation on the Angular framework. You are now familiar with the most commonly used parts of the framework. So what's next now? If you want to continue diving deeper into the Angular ecosystem, I would recommend that you take now the Angular Core Deep Dive course. This course is a superset of the Angular for Beginners course that you just took. So the introduction part of the course is going to be the same content that you already saw, but then we're going to take this much deeper. We're going to cover a lot of intermediate to advanced features of the Angular framework. For example, here we are going to cover everything that relates to local template querying, the viewChild and viewChildren decorators, and we're going to cover in detail Angular content projection. We have a whole section on that. We're going to cover dynamic Angular templates, and we're going to cover directives in detail. We're going to learn how to build our own custom attribute directives, including structural directives very similar to ngIf, for example. Next, we're going to cover in detail Angular view encapsulation. We're going to talk about the multiple modes that are available for encapsulating our components and the advantages of view encapsulation in general. Next, we are going to cover the Angular dependency injection system. We are going to learn exactly how the dependency injection system works under the hood. We are going to understand hierarchical dependency injection, and we are going to learn how to write our own injection tokens and providers. So these are the most advanced use cases of Angular dependency injection. We are also going to cover Angular change detection. We are going to learn how default change detection works, and we are going to learn how on-push change detection works. We're going to see the trade-offs between the two modes of change detection, and we are also going to learn how to do our own custom change detection if necessary. We're going to cover in detail all the Angular component lifecycle hooks that are available, including here a complete overview of all the hooks and the sequence in which they are called by the framework. We're going to learn all about Angular modules and custom pipes. We're going to talk about the difference between pure versus impure pipes. Here we have a complete section on Angular internationalization. We're going to learn how to take an application that is built using one language and translate it into multiple languages with the help of the Angular CLI. We are also going to cover in detail Angular elements. So as you can see, this will give you a very solid foundation on the Angular core and common modules. If you want to take it from there, you can continue to explore the Angular ecosystem. We also have available here a course on the TypeScript language. There is a lot to TypeScript, and here we are going to build a complete Node REST API. We're going to be querying a SQL database, so it's a very common use case. In order to dive deeper into the RxJS library, we have here just the course for that. It's the RxJS in Practice course. We also have courses on Angular Forms and the Angular Router. The NGRX in-depth course is one of our most popular courses. Here we are going to give a complete overview of the NGRX ecosystem. If you want to build your applications using plain RxJS without necessarily using a store library, we have here a course that will guide you through a series of very commonly used Angular reactive patterns. And we have also many other courses. We have the Angular Advanced Library Laboratory, we have a complete course on security, on progressive web applications, on the Angular Material Widget Library, and we have the Angular Universal course. We also have here other courses available. We are building new courses all the time. About 25% of all our videos are freely available, so you can watch them even if you are not logged into our website. You can watch for free any lesson that is not marked here with a red P. So as you can see, there is a lot of material available. To get notified whenever new content, including videos or blog posts, are available, I would recommend that you subscribe here to our newsletter. Simply click here the newsletter menu item and subscribe to the Angular University newsletter. You will receive weekly Angular content, including ecosystem news. You're going to receive new blog posts and PDFs, besides frequent video courses that we have available in our YouTube channel. Please let me know in the comment section below what other content would you like to see from the Angular University. I hope that you enjoyed the course. I want to thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.